So, with the city I live in going back into another lockdown, I thought I'd take the time to join a game jam. Hey everyone, I'm Jake, and this is the making of Parallels. So the game jam in question was the GeoJam 2021, a week-long game jam hosted by game dev and YouTuber Icoso. The premise of the GeoJam was that you could only use geometric shapes, which I quite liked, and on top of that the theme for this jam was Switch, which I was pretty excited for. Straight off the bat I knew I wanted to make a puzzle platformer where the colours on the screen would invert every time the player jumped. I started off by getting basic player movement down and then started on the colour switch mechanic. Soon enough that was completed and I started adding hazards into the game. The first hazard I implemented was spikes that killed the player and respawned them on collision. This was super easy to implement and didn't take too long at all. Next up I added some screen shake every time the player died, as well as a little zoom in and out effect every time the colour switched, as some visual feedback for the player. So with that done and static dangers in place, the next logical step was moving enemies. So I made a little circle enemy that simply patrolled from left and right on a platform, which would also kill the player on collision. And that was pretty much all for day 1. I started day 2 by completely overhauling the player controller, allowing the player to be able to wall jump. This would allow me to design levels with much more verticality as well. Next up was level design. I wanted each level to be simple enough, you just have to reach the portal. But with that being said, you'll need to constantly be jumping and moving around to see what dangers you're faced with. The goal was to create a few small levels, all with a different new mechanic to teach the player, and then throw them into levels with all those mechanics combined. I then added a death counter which ticked up every time the player died. I added some UI to keep track of that on the top left corner of the screen as well, so the player knew how many times they had died in that level. After that I implemented a level timer. I feel like this adds an element of urgency for the player to complete the level in the shortest amount of time possible. If I had more time I would have liked to add some sort of leaderboard showing the player the time they got for each level, but that's something I can add later on if I decide to continue working on this game. I then wrapped up day 2 by adding scene transitions. This was pretty easy to implement and I'm really happy with the transition I came up with, as opposed to the generic fade in and out. After this, I spent a large chunk of time creating levels and playtesting along the way. My aim was to have 10 levels with some sort of difficulty curve. While this was really fun, I soon came to realise that the way I was creating levels was super messy, and I probably should have used the tile maps instead, but that's something to keep in mind for next time. With that done, I started on sound effects. I used BFXR to create jump, death, portal, and key pickup sounds. I imported them into Unity and started on an audio manager. This was another thing that in hindsight could have been handled a lot better, but it's a game jam, so I could code a little bit messy. After that was all done and dusted, I tried to create my own background music, but after about an hour of trial and error and mostly failure, I called it quits and found some royalty-free music to slap into the game, which I much preferred the sound of. I then spent some time making a main menu and a pause menu, as well as polishing everything up. I created the itch page and submitted the game, and just like that the jam was over. After the deadline, I had rebuilt the game for WebGL, as well as had a downloadable build available. If you'd like to check out the game, I'll leave links to the game's trailer as well as the itch.io page in the description below. I'd really love to hear all your feedback. And on a final note, if you'd like to support me in my games, feel free to buy me a coffee. The link to that is also in the description. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.